This week, Travis Spencer, CEO of Security, is with us to discuss modern access security. Then we have a whole panel of guests with us to discuss the Joe Sullivan case in a special two-parter. That means we're skipping the news this week, so we'll have 2 weeks worth of news for you next week. This is Enterprise Security Weekly. Let's get started.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation of cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Customers want fast and frictionless digital experiences, yet also expect protection against breaches, privacy violations, and fraud. Drive engagement by optimizing security and convenience to attract and retain customers. Use the PingOne cloud platform to build, test, and optimize digital experiences. The no-code orchestration engine weaves together authentication, user management, and MFA, all of which can enhance security, drive engagement, and boost revenues. Visit securityweekly.com/ping identity to learn more. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy International Accounting Day. This is episode 296, recorded on Thursday, November 10th, 2022. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria. And joining me is the Master of Marketing, the Mayor of Mayhem, Tyler Shield.
Hey, Adrian. Good to hear your voice.
Good to hear yours, too. Also joining me is the Herald of Hacking, the Captain of Crypto, Mr. Tyler Robinson. How are you, Tyler?
Happy Accounting Day. That doesn't work. I'm sorry.
No, it's not happy. Well, I said happy International Accounting Day, but it's not International Happy Accounting Day. It's just...
Oh, okay. Fair.
I know that doesn't sound too exciting, but recently somebody shared with me, I'd give them a shout out, but I'm not sure they want me to give them a shout out on this, but they were really getting into a podcast called What the Fraud? And it's two accountants. Now, I mean, it sounds like it could be really dry, but one of the accountants has been doing stand-up comedy for years. So, great chemistry between the podcast hosts, and they've got these, fraud stories are crazy, like these stories about, someone working for like a small town in the Midwest and embezzling something like 45 million over 7 years. It's like, how did the town even have that much money to lose? But fascinating podcast. And there's a lot of crossovers, I think, between fraud and InfoSec. I think some CISOs even may have fraud underneath, right? CSO, right? Maybe not CISO.
I was going to say, there's no point in all this security stuff if there's no money involved, so.
Yeah. All right, quick announcement here. You can now find us on Instagram. And I think we may also show up on Mastodon here pretty soon. We're looking at that as well. So, but on Instagram, you can follow us for highlight reels, giveaway announcements, and more. And it's Sec Weekly. For those listening, we're throwing it up on the screen here, but it's @SEC Weekly is our handle on Instagram. Same as our handle on Twitter. All right, so our first interview here is sponsored by Curity. Today's topic is modern access security, ditch passwords, implement zero trust, and secure APIs. We're excited to have Travis Spencer, CEO at Curity, with us today. Travis has worked extensively with organizations in various industries in various countries. His broad market exposure, coupled with a background in application development, allows him to work with organizations on both low-level technical issues as well as high-level questions, which is always a great combination. Welcome, Travis.
Thanks, Adrian. Great to be with you and your other guest today.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a good conversation that we've got queued up for today. The title is pretty broad, though. So there's a lot we can talk about today. Maybe, give us a little level set today. Tell us a little bit about what Curity does before we dig into some of the topics here.
Sure. So what we do at Curity is we help our customers answer the question of who you are online. And it's such an easy thing for us people to do. Adrian, you and I talked before today's session, and I recognize you the moment you joined in there. As people, we know each other, we know each other's voices, we know each other quickly, and then how to identify each other. But a computer, it's not so easy. Computers have to be taught, and they know very little, just a 0 and a 1. So we have to build on it from that. And it can be pretty complicated in the end. And so there's a lot of standards, thankfully, these days that help with that. And at Curity, we've implemented those and have certified our implementation of them so that our customers can use the implementation confidently to know that they're arriving at the correct answer of who the person is that is interacting with their digital services and their data.
Now, is that leveraging things like behavioral analysis, conditional access, some of the heuristic-based detections for unusual logins? I'm assuming this is leveraging like OAuth and SAML and JWT tokens and all of the new modern auth. Is it combining those things with additional means to validate that?
It is, and so you kind of, that's the crux of it there, Tyler, is like you have all these different applications, all these different APIs on one side, and on the other side you have all these identities, all these repositories, all these ways of logging in, and maybe taking into account behavior, maybe taking into account geographical location. All these different kinds of identities need to be integrated into all these different applications. And so the Curity Identity Server, which is our product, can use standards like OAuth and OpenID Connect to provide the answer to that question of who you are in a way that they can consume it. So then they don't have to worry about, do we use behavioral analysis, or was there all these different things going on. It's just it gets a token from the platform that it trusts, and then it can use the data in there knowing that, that those proper checks and authentication were performed.
That's awesome. Now, as far as the, is that proxying those typical authentications where you guys are the identity provider, but for integrations for applications that may not understand one of the many authentication languages that you guys speak, or a different application speaks, are you able to proxy that authentication or bolt on an integration to that so that you can actually move to a more modern authentication, even if particular places don't support that directly?
Mm-hmm. So there are different approaches to adding in OAuth and OpenID Connect, and a lot of folks out there are taking a proxy approach. We ourselves do not, so we don't provide a gateway per se. Instead, applications integrate into our identity server using the protocols themselves. There's lots of frameworks, toolkits out there. We provide some of them ourselves in various languages. And then after the token is issued and you want to start calling an API, that's more a place for a proxy to get involved. And so we leave that to others like reverse proxies or whatnot.
That's awesome. So from a zero, Adrian, I think you're muted, or maybe I can't hear you.
No, go ahead.
No, there we go. No, I was going to ask, so from that standpoint, does this provide a mechanism for purely cloud identity companies, and as well as hybrid companies that are leveraging some cloud identity and some on-prem? Does that mix and integration happen fairly naturally with your product?
With our product, it does. Our product can run anywhere, whether that's in a public cloud or private cloud. It can run on-premise or computers under your desk. We found it important to support any cloud environment because we see a time already now and more so in the future where organizations will be spanning multiple clouds and really wanting to take the identity with them, because that's really the thing that will hold back that multi-cloud deployment. So it works in all cloud environments, and the reason being is because it's going to be increasingly necessary to span those different cloud providers.
Yeah, so what I was going to ask, talking about, switching gears a little bit with identity. Identity is something that's, kind of a, I don't know what it brings up for most people, but I used to just connect it with individuals. We didn't used to call, service accounts and automation tools, the accounts, the identities that those systems had, that devices have. We didn't typically consider under this, the more general user management route. But, nowadays, like we just had somebody on last week talking about RPA, security with robotic process automation, which is kind of a fascinating area, because it's somewhere in between like a service account, something that would use an API, and a user account, because it's using an application the way a person would, not the way a machine would. So what, is that a big part of this? Especially talking about zero trust, you have to, is that a big chunk of this, figuring out like how you handle those accounts as well, because you need visibility on those. I think we've seen a lot of breaches where those kinds of credentials, because they're not really, they're not visible, they're not thought of, can sometimes get easily abused.
Yeah, I think really what is needed, and what we're trying to do, at least at Curity, is to provide the sort of building blocks, or the Lego bricks that you can construct all sorts of different identity solutions to all sorts of different identity problems, whether that's, robotic identities or account identities or device identities or actual natural person identities. It really comes down to different methods of identification, different places where you're going to store those identities, maybe different kinds of tokens that you'd issue to those different consumers. Maybe it's a JSON Web Token like Tyler mentioned, or maybe it's a CBOR binary token. So what we're trying to do in our product, at least, is to connect to all sorts of different authentication methods or types, and then also store identities in lots of different places, because there are a growing number of use cases, and the ones that we know of today are not going to be the same ones that are going to exist in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. So if we provide this sort of framework or platform on which all sorts of new things can be built, our product will continue to provide value to our customers, despite their use cases changing and evolving over time.
Nice.
I am curious from a zero. This almost sounds like solving one of the core pillars of zero trust, and how that identity piece plays into
arguably the first piece,
roadmap,
right? First pillar.
Yes.
I would argue that needs to be the
first.
First.
Place yourself there.
I like to say back when Google did, the Google engineers did the original BeyondCore talk. Like step one, they're kind of laying out step ones of how we did what they called zero trust, which was BeyondCore. Like step one was, figure out what people needed access to, and get a directory together, get identity solved for like the first 3 or 4 years before they could do anything else, right?
No, exactly. And the analogy I like to use sometimes is like it's climbing a mountain. At the top of the mountain, the summit is answering the question of what are you allowed to do. That's where we all want to get to. But unfortunately, we have to answer the question of who are you first. And from there, we can start to figure out your entitlements. And the time will come when we need to know less about you in particular, with things like Web3 and decentralized identity. But at some point, we need to know something about you so that we can answer the question of what are you allowed to do. And so that first base camp as you climb up the summit is authentication, and the summit then being authorization. So it's really important, I think, when thinking about zero trust and providing checking and verifying all the time of what you're allowed to do. First and foremost, you need to figure out who people are, who accounts are, and then what their entitlements are.
How are some of the protections and mitigations being put into place? This is kind of a common technique we've started to see many of the ransomware gangs and many of the threat actors going after, leveraging things like the raccoon stealer, the redline stealer, built-in browser functions and stealing, where they're taking the tokens or the sessions or the cookies, and they're leveraging those in order to gain that authentication. What are some of the protections and means you guys are leveraging in order to combat some of that?
Yeah, there's something called a proof of possession token. So that in order to steal a token, you have to. There's two types. There's a bearer token, a proof of possession token. So if you have a bearer token, that's like cash. If I'm lucky and I find $10 on the street, I can just pick up that $10 bill and walk in to the shop and spend it, and the cashier is not going to ask me like, "Hey, did you find this on the street?" I'm the bearer of that note. They'll just accept it and use it. So that's kind of like what you're talking about in ransomware or whatever, where they're finding those tokens and grabbing them and taking somewhere else and just using them like cash. And then there's another kind of token, which is called a bearer token, and that's more like a credit card, where it's bound to me as a person. I've got a PIN every time I touch it to a point of sale system. I've got to put in a PIN code to unlock it and make it useful. And so those kind of tokens are bound to me, and every time I use them, I got to prove I have possession of a secret. And so in protocols like OAuth and others, you can add on top of that support for holder of key tokens or proof of possession tokens like a credit card. And so those are helping to avoid that stolen token problem you're talking about, Tyler.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great analogy, the cash versus credit card. I'd never heard it put that way, but I think that really helps to kind of understand the difference between the two there.
Yeah, because if a ransomware gets a hold of a token, it still doesn't have your PIN or your secret. You can't prove possession of that. So that token that the ransomware has stolen isn't going to be useful. And so there's a profile or a sort of extra standards that are built on top of OAuth and OpenID that are called financial grade API or FAPI, and those mandate the use of these proof of possession tokens. And these are banking grade and military grade versions of OpenID and OAuth. And so our software implements those, and even non-financial organizations more and more are turning to that version of OpenID. So using that in large-scale SaaS providers where they can't afford a breach, they can't afford identities to be stolen or tokens to be exfiltrated, like you're talking about. And so, for your audience, that's something to definitely go and check out, is to learn more about FAPI. You can read about it on our website. We've got tons and tons of resources that will explain, what is a sender constraint token and how does this work? How can I implement this in my API and start leveraging that?
I am curious around some of the more modern authentication types like FIDO2 and some of the passwordless stuff really being forced and pushed. I'm assuming all of that is integratable and integrated and capable. Can you speak to some of the more novel stuff and additional stuff you alluded to earlier that got my attention around Web3 and potential blockchain immutable identities? What kind of stuff are you guys working on there?
So first of all, I'll tell a little bit about WebAuth N. WebAuth N is a great protocol. There's a lot that goes into actually implementing that. And really what I'm excited about is how you can use the simplicity of OpenID, because it really is a very simple protocol to integrate into applications, whether it's PHP or Ruby or Python or whatever. It's quite easy. And then to be able to, from a product like ours, integrate using WebAuth N. So any of the complexity in that is sort of shielded and protected from the application. And even though you can implement things like WebAuth N, it's great if you can leverage existing standards and not even have to know about other identity systems or authentication methods that are being added in your application. Just keeps working. And that's one of the values that we provide. And so as far as Web3 goes and crypto-based identity systems like decentralized identity and self-sovereign identity, it's the same story there. It's like if your application keeps working, it's keep calling these APIs, and all of a sudden now the identity is a decentralized one. It doesn't much matter to the application, and I think that's a great way that we're going to see Web3 and those things adopted, is that applications can just kind of function on this OAuth OpenID Connect substrate and then start using identities where now as users, we don't have to release as much information. You don't have to know me in particular. You just need to know I'm a citizen of America and a permanent resident of Sweden, and I'm old enough to consume alcoholic beverages, and I can vote in this place and that place and things like that. So you don't have to know about me in particular, Travis, but you just need to know these sort of things. But to the application, it's just still talking OAuth. It's still just talking OpenID. And if we use things like financial grade versions of those, the security of it is still quite high. And there's a lot of work going on in the OpenID Foundation, which is the standards body that defines OpenID and builds that on top of OAuth to bind OpenID into decentralized identity. And that's really what we're looking at and working on right now, is implementing those protocols so that we can issue verified credentials, so that we can interact with wallets, things like that, and then provide that into our customers' applications, continually using that OAuth and OpenID Connect base that they've established.
Now, you mentioned a lot of resources on the Security website, and you. I think it's hard to overstate the amount of resources and tools you have. Like you've got on the Security side alone, you've got some different like you've got a developer portal, a bunch of stuff there. Then you've also got the OAuth.tools site. You've got the Nordic APIs site. Is that, I don't know, is that part of the DNA of the company, is just to have all these educational resources, or does that just really, is that the easiest way to educate the market as to like what you're trying to do with the product?
Well, I mean, it is part of educating the folks so that they know how to use our product, but I think it is more of our ethos. I mean, we started Nordic APIs to tell about everything to do with APIs. I mean, we're only focused on API security, but there's so much more that goes into it. It's the design, it's the business models, it's how do you create that network effect and platform with an API, and security is part of it. And we can tell that bit of the story, and even that we can't tell the whole thing. So, building that community, building that group, bringing them together in in-person events and at summits, and sharing information on the blog and the social media, that was just like, there's so much to say, so we need a place to say it. And then with OAuth tools, I mean, that was born out of a need that we ourselves had. I mean, we have a server that can do so much of OAuth and OpenID Connect. I mean, if you take all of those specifications and print them out, they're as thick as War and Peace 5 times over. And we've implemented almost all of that. And so we need to have some tools that can interact with our server, so we can just doink around and test this stuff out and try different things, show different things, and it just doesn't get it done in curl when you're doing it all day long. So we had to build that. And then when it comes to the website, I mean, there's just so much to say, and to explain that in a coherent way, we just have to write a lot. We have to create a lot of videos and explain a lot of things. And so I think it's just to make sure that people get the right information and can leverage these great standards, leverage these tools, and build things with them.
Yeah, now, maybe we can talk about the future a bit. So certainly, one topic that comes up a lot is the often continually blurring line between personal and corporate or work account. And those identities, like, didn't initially occur to me when I started at the job I'm at that I should create a separate GitHub account, to interact with our repos and do code reviews and and submit pull requests and all that. But yeah, the other day I noticed everybody else has this like dash, company name account, and here I am using my personal account that's been around for 15, 20 years. And I see that a lot with, like Apple products are the same way. Like there's not, you don't really have like a work Apple ID to log into your, but like, where is this going? Like, are some of these standards going to help with that, where maybe you can have one ID and the ID has both a work identity and a personal identity? Or, is it going to continue to be messy?
Well, unfortunately, I think it will continue to be messy, but I think my hope is that we'll be cleaning those things up as we go. Really, I have a lot of hope for decentralized identity and self-sovereign identity. I see it as a paradigm shift for our society from like the horse and buggy to the automobile. It's that revolutionary. I mean, pre-internet versus internet. And in those cases, Adrian, like we'll have a wallet, it will have some information. It might be on our phone. It might be hosted at some sort of trusted steward, some trusted website. And there we'll be able to release information like you're in a certain team. You belong to a certain cohort that you can develop code together with those people. And so you won't have to release all sorts of information about your specific GitHub account, but just that you're in this cohort, you're in this group, you have the right to review code. And for this other group, you also have push rights into that repository. So it won't be your identity per se anymore. It will be the attributes about you, and a wallet or a steward will be able to safeguard that for you. That's really my hope, so that it isn't corporate or non-corporate, it isn't personal or work anymore. It's more just what are the attributes about you, and then the receiver of that will be able to verify that credential, verify that you are a member of that cohort, you're a member of that group of people who are writing code, and say, yeah, I believe that this person is in this group because I trust this issuer of that attribute, that the issuer of that credential.
Right. I noticed that with everybody jumping to Mastodon recently from Twitter. I got set up on there as well, and I thought I already had an account over there, but apparently not. And I got very confused about, okay, what does this with the Mastodon model is obviously very different from Twitter, where I knew that the server I was connecting to was run by a specific person. I know who that person is, and I trust them somewhat. And but I got a little bit confused about, like, okay, what can I do with other Mastodon servers? Can I not go to those? Can I talk on those? And one of the things I noticed is you can do some additional stuff to increase confidence that you are who you say you are. And this is something I think I first saw with Keybase, where you could drop in a DNS text record, or you can put a key in the root of your website, something like that. You can connect it to some social media accounts. So with the idea being, okay, each of these proofs increases my confidence that this really is the person that they say they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really the key here, is we need that trust, right? So other use cases that you and your audience might be familiar with is like if you want to handle the health of an aging parent or something, you might need to get a power of attorney, which might involve like scanning passports and doing interviews like this where they can see you in video or hear you, and then sort of authenticating and identifying you. And that gives trust then, because you verified that, and they are assured to a higher degree of who you are. And really what decentralized identity will bring to the mix is a bunch of these different trust anchors around the internet, where it could be a code repository, it could be a legal firm, it could be, like you're saying, a social network. All these different trust anchors then will make accountability for what you're asserting or what's being asserted about you.
So are there standards to help with that? You know, what is that? You know, it's definitely not convenient today. Like to go
No, it's not convenient today, and
create a
those standards.
yeah.
Those standards are coming, thankfully, and
Okay.
really what I'm most excited about is that those standards are being built on top of OAuth and OpenID Connect, and those standards. There's also other ones sort of complementing OpenID, which is a standard called DIDCOM, but then there's also the verified credential standard from the W3C, and others. Will actually be in San Francisco next week at the Internet Identity Workshop, or IIW, to talk about and help form those standards that will help with these sorts of things that we're discussing now. They're in early days.
Very cool. Very, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's I don't want to live in a world where every new account I open, I have to add a new text
No,
record.
we're working to fix that for you.
Excellent. And you know, love security, but you know, another thing I hate are I don't want to use hardware keys. Like I know people love them. They love their YubiKeys or their Google Titans, and they work for what they work for. But again, the inconvenience, you know, especially since I'm carrying a phone around with me, and I understand, you know, the latest FIDO I think is going to help with this, where your phone can be now a security key. You know, remembering to bring them with me, and of course I can't do anything simply, so I've got 5 of them, and sometimes I forget which of the 5 that I use with a given service. So that's something I'm hoping we can move past as well, because authentication, you know, it's huge friction for business. You know, the harder you make it for people to use a service, to log on, you know, I've noticed a lot of consumer services now require 2FA set up at the beginning. They don't give you a choice, you know, and it's I'm worried if it doesn't, you know, stay below the threshold of convenience here, you know, it's you know, we're in danger of bad practices, or you know, people going elsewhere, you know, not choosing the most secure service because it's too inconvenient.
Or relying so much on single sign-on that we have one account that gets breached and breaches all of them. So I think we've kind of got that fine line where we have to do a better job at maintaining those very secure accounts and doing a better job of the authentication piece, and then leveraging those for the single sign-on in places that are meaningful and have good security setup. And I'm very curious on how you guys are doing some of that. So I've been reading some of your docs over here.
Yeah, I think the thing I would say to the architects in your audience is make that decision irrelevant, because what you decide today and how you do authentication today won't be the same as in 2, 3, 5 years from now. So what you want to do is you want to put down a platform that allows you to make changes to those authentication options that won't disrupt all the applications you've integrated with. If you got apps deployed out into the app stores, you don't want to have to go and recode and re-verify and get those certified every single time you add a new login method. That's really a non-starter. You want to build a platform that's going to allow authentication choices. And so like you're talking about there, Adrian, we need to make sure that we have security, but also convenience. And WebAuthn, it's great in the browser. It's being adapted now to work in mobile devices. There's some discrepancies we found between Android and iOS. I think those will get hammered out, and then we'll have some pretty nice convenient ways of logging in, where, you know, with a phone I can, you know, enter a PIN or use my face or my finger if I'm comfortable with using the biometrics, and then go straight into different applications. And then Tyler, it won't be SSO really, but I think, or at least we won't have to rely on that solely, but we can make it easier, like reduced login, you know, not having to log in as often, or making it easier to log in by just holding a phone over my face. That's a lot simpler. And so even if I have to do it a little more often, you know, just holding the phone up to my face, or just, you know, I'm holding the phone anyway because I'm working with the application, I won't even notice the login process perhaps. So it will be convenient, but also secure.
That is.
But again, I think
also
the important part, sorry, just to jump in there, I just want to go back to the primary point, which is make that question irrelevant, because all those things are sexy and cool. But if we go after new and shiny, we might end up building systems that are not evolvable.
No, I love the framework idea, and I love having that kind of standardized place where you're not having to rechange, re-authenticate, re-engage all of the developers' time, the expense that it takes to redeploy all that. That makes a ton of sense and seems like a great return on investment right there for any project that you're trying to deploy that on.
Yeah,
I am curious around the API security. You guys, does your platform handle API security and leveraging different integrations and technologies for that API security? That's like the new popular thing to try and look at is understanding and securing the APIs, because we all know the front end stuff has gotten a little better and a little harder, but then the APIs are all still exposed and you have the same issues on the back end side.
Yeah, so what we do is we issue the tokens that are used to protect the APIs, but then it's some sort of enforcement point that's going to be calling into the microservice mesh or some sort of gateway standing there at the edge that's going to be checking those tokens. And so there's multiple ways to do that. I mean, if it's a JOT token, which has all of the values in it, it can do the authorization right there. We have integrations with different providers like Apogee and Nginx and whatnot to do that right in line. But then there's also another approach, which is called the phantom token approach, where the token itself doesn't contain any data. There's no PII in there. There's no values in there. It's just an opaque reference to the actual information about that user. So then as it passes through the gateway, that phantom token can be exchanged from an Nginx, from an Apogee, from an Azure gateway or AWS gateway, called over to Security, convert that into a token that has all that information, that by value JSON web token, and then pass that back into the microservice, into the mesh, pass that around and use that. So all of that data about the user is used internally, but on the outside world, all you ever see is that opaque reference to the identity data. It's great pattern because in the gateway you can even cache that. The opaque reference is a globally unique identifier, so you can cache it across all your microservices. So it doesn't matter which of your API clients or which APIs the API client is consuming, it can use the same token if you have that sharing model. And so we have a lot of integrations, which you can see about on our website for different API gateways. But really, we do it either by partnering rather than trying to provide a gateway ourselves.
No, that's great. That's actually probably a better way to do that than having to cover down and do it all.
No, exactly. And I mean, verifying a token is such a different job than issuing a token. And quite frankly, verifying a token is a trivial job compared to issuing one. I mean, figuring out who someone is, going and sourcing claims from a relational database and call this web service over here and use this information from the WebAuthn key or from a social media that you logged in with, put all that together into a token, sign it, maybe add another token inside of that. It's a lot of sophistication that goes into that. And so we just kind of say, okay, stop. That's where we end. Everything after that is the between the API client and the API itself, and we can help with that conversion if a customer wants to deploy that phantom token approach. But really, we see that as someone else's deal to do.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And honestly, that's the part that, having done this a lot and seen a lot of really bad tokens, that is the part that most companies end up getting wrong is the token side. So if you're taking that part and obscuring that from them and providing something that is done right and done well, then that just allows the developers to be able to focus on the things that they're actually good at and the things that they're actually trying to build. I think that's a much better approach for most companies.
Yeah, I agree.
We may have lost the context for this at this point, but somebody asked in the chat, hello, how is that different from PBAP? And I'm not even familiar with that acronym, so I don't know if that makes sense to you at this point, Travis, but
I'm trying to pop a few off the stack and remember what we were talking about. But
all I find when I look it up is Bluetooth PBAP, Bluetooth phone book access profile. I don't think that fits with anything we were talking about.
I think it's an API authentication key, right? I don't know. I think are they talking about POAP? That's that would be more along the lines of what we were talking about, but I don't know.
Yeah, I asked for some more context, but
sorry, audience member, whoever that was.
We'll answer that question another time. Understand it better. But Travis, this has been great.
Has been.
You answered so many questions and so well. Like I will always remember the cash versus credit card, metaphor there. That's super helpful. But thanks for joining Enterprise Security Weekly today and sharing all your knowledge.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/security to learn even more. Like I said, their website has a ton of stuff on it, a lot to dig into. And stay tuned. When we come back, we've got a very special discussion for you. We've put together a panel of CISOs and InfoSec experts to discuss the impact of the Joe Sullivan case on security leadership.